Welcome to Plain Civics. I'm Joe Ulery.
And I'm Bobbi Fisher.
And we're here today to teach you how the government works and how we, the people, can be better citizens. Bobbi, what's the topic?
The topic today is why the framers chose a democratic republic form of government over other forms of government.
But before we get there, we always like to take just a moment out of the gate so we can get to know a little bit about each other. Last week, we learned that you like to drive and you wanted to play the air drums.
That's correct.
So, the Fast Five.
Today I'm going to ask you, coffee or tea?
Tea.
Dirty Dancing or Footloose?
Oh, gosh. Oh, as a movie.
Yes.
I thought you meant...
The movie.
Footloose.
Really? Okay. 4th of July or Christmas?
4th of July.
Bacon or sausage?
Bacon.
The Beatles or the Rolling Stones?
Beatles.
Very good.
Are we different on some of those?
The coffee or tea?
Your coffee.
And I would have chosen Dirty Dancing.
Why?
Patrick Swayze.
Patrick Swayze. She's like the wind.
But the other one's now sausage, not bacon.
Really?
Yes.
Sausage links or sausage patties?
Patties.
All right, Bobbi, I'm throwing it back to you. Let's get to work.
And now our feature presentation.
Last episode, we hopefully made it clear what a democratic republic, what that term means. That's what the United States is, where the citizens or the people hold the supreme power, that's the democracy part, and exercise it through elected representatives, that's the republic part. And those representatives are elected in periodic free elections. We are an indirect democracy as opposed to a direct democracy. In a 20-minute format, we just can't talk
cover it all.
And yeah.
All right, so let's jump in.
So how does a democracy or a democratic republic differ from other forms of government? Generally, as I said, there are 5 main forms of government. The first we've talked about, democracy. So as we've discussed, the United States is considered a representative democracy or a democratic republic. And you have to understand that in a lot of cases there are interchangeable terms. So that's why I'm bringing them all out in the open so that you think, oh, democratic republic, that's a representative democracy.
All right, so let's talk about number 1. You've got democracy, and I know we've talked about different forms of democracy.
Right. We're a democratic republic, which is also considered a representative democracy. So if you think about the two terms, those are interchangeable. And a lot of times there are some interchangeable terms. So another type of democracy that's out there, found mostly in European nations, is called a parliamentary democracy, which basically just means the way the representatives are elected is a little bit different, and they have parliament instead of a Congress. Basically is somewhat similar. There's also what's known as a constitutional monarchy. So if you look at the United Kingdom, which if you think of like England and Canada and so forth, they still have a monarch, which is a king or a queen. They have some limited power, but most of the power of the actual lawmaking is with Parliament in a constitutional monarchy. The monarch, the king or queen, doesn't usually make decisions. They just have a lot of ceremonial roles. They open parliamentary sessions, and it's not like in the 1700s when there was a king or a queen. Their type of government has evolved over time. In the UK, we have a king right now, King Charles, and we have parliament. Second form of government is just a monarchy. So again, a monarch is a king or a queen. In a true monarchy, you have a person who reigns or rules, not reign as in outside, but R-E-I-G-N-S, for life. Their rule is for life or until they would decide to possibly abdicate or give up their throne.
Which did happen.
Which it could, either by choice or maybe by, the military wants to take over or some other person becomes strong enough to overthrow them. An example of that is when the colonies wanted their freedom from England back in the 1700s. King George III was the king of England at the time. And at that time, England was an absolute monarchy. So it wasn't like today where they're a constitutional monarchy. There was no parliament. The king was the sole ruler. Again, as time has gone on, that's changed. There are still a few countries in the world today that have a monarchy.
So now let's move to number 3.
Called an oligarchy, which comes of the word democracy. It also comes from the Greek, which literally means rule by a few. So instead of rule by the people, this is rule by a few. So power rests with a small group of people. Some possibilities would be like nobility, or people that
Wealth.
have all the wealth, or the military could be the small group, or a corporate type or business. It could be an educational group. And the country with an oligarchical form of government might still have a president. It just depends on how they establish it. But generally, the leaders in an oligarchy rely on oppression and coercion and public obedience. For example, in today's world, examples of oligarchies would be the Russian Federation, Iran is an oligarchy, and the Philippines is an oligarchy. So they have, like, Russia has Putin, who's their leader, but he's backed by a lot of these rich oligarchs, and he himself is very rich. He pretty much rules what goes on in Russia, and the same thing would be in Iran if you look up how their government is set up today. I kind of have a footnote here. Some scholars today have suggested that the United States has been moving toward this form of government, not that we are yet, but that we're moving towards it because of the small concentration of wealth and wealthy donors to political parties. And that's gotten especially worse since the Supreme Court case back in 2010, which was called Citizens United versus the FEC. The decision by the Supreme Court removed limits on donations to political campaigns. And so, as we saw just in the campaign we just had, we had some of the richest people in our nation contributing to one of the campaigns. Both campaigns get a lot of money, but we saw particularly large amounts on one side.
All right, so that's oligarchy. So let's go to number 4.
Authoritarianism, where in that form of government, the political plurality or diversity is removed by eliminating free and competitive elections. There's a strong central power, usually called an autocrat. So typically their title would be a dictator or a monarch, possibly. Or it could be also an oligarchy. The leader or leaders often reduce the separation of powers, they reduce the civil liberties of the people, and they take away rule of law, which means no one is above the law, but they take that away. So you lose your individual freedoms, you do not have the prospect of being protected by the law or the courts in some extreme cases.
Off with the head.
Yeah, put you to death or you send you to prison for the rest of your life.
That's hard to think about as an American. So that's number 4. And so this brings us to number 5.
And you'll notice on the last one, the authoritarianism, that kind of, like I said, some of these cross over. So you could have an authoritarian, and it could also be kind of an oligarchic type situation. And the same thing is true with number 5, which is totalitarianism, where power is held by one person, usually known as a dictator, who controls national politics and policies by outlawing opposition and completely controlling both the public and private areas of life. Everything. The media is controlled by the dictator, education, health, opinions, arts, sciences, private life, wages, basically every aspect of life.
And you have some examples of folks here to kind of help picture in our head who these dictators or people that rule the fist.
We can kind of think of this as like the worst, maybe authoritarianism gone to the worst possible.
The worst of the worst.
Case. Examples from history and more recent history, Joseph Stalin from the Soviet Union back in the 20th century, and Adolf Hitler from Nazi Germany. And of course there was Mussolini from Italy at the same time. Now, we still have these forms of government today. Now, one just recently changed, and that was, if you pay attention to the news, just within the last, I think, 2 or 3 months, Bashar al-Assad, who was the dictator of Syria, abdicated a couple months ago, fled to, we believe, Russia. We don't know that for certain, but that's been the story. The Syrian people not only were they in civil war and, he held strict control there, and we still have Kim Jong-un in North Korea, who runs a totalitarian government.
And so you think about these folks and you think about what we have in America. We've still got our freedoms and we can still have our opinions. And you and I can sit here in this room, which, by the way, we're at the Logansport Cass County Public Library, which is an open place where you can come find resources, educate yourself. It's open for the people to learn. In this kind of scenario, Bobbi, discouraged.
Right.
Think about that. We take so much for granted of how you and I can argue that green is the best color, or no, it's blue, or that this is the church that I want to go to, or I'm going to drive this car or have this job, or I'm going to bring my kid up to believe this or that. In this system, under this system, we don't get to decide anything.
Even under the authoritarian, if you're into music, for example, if an artist here in the United States wants to do a protest song, that's fine, because we are given that in the First Amendment.
Yes.
We can peacefully protest and without fear of retribution by the government.
I know recently on my Facebook page, there have been people like, oh, you know what? First Amendment. What does that really mean? Is it to keep the government from putting a piece of tape over our mouth and keeping us from talking about something? Can you break that down, freedom of speech?
This will be a good topic for a
whole podcast.
episode. But briefly, back when the colonies separated from England, they had their Tea Party and all that stuff. People were arrested for going against the government, the king. And that was one thing that they wanted to be able to speak out if they didn't like what the government was doing, and not have a fear of being arrested or put in prison forever. If you can't speak out against something the government is doing, then you're not living a very good life.
Regardless of whether you're on the right or you're on the left, I think that we've grown to take for granted some of the things that if we went back generation in our families, the things that were the top of mind and the things that great grandpa fought for and was willing to put on a coat of uniform and go fight for these things, it seems like we've just sort of forgotten, and those things are just like from 200 years ago and we don't even care.
I think that's true. And one reason I wanted to cover these 5 forms of government is so that hopefully it will get people thinking about, do I see that happening? Do I see trends in the United States toward any of these types of governments, and do I like that? Or do I like having these freedoms that we enjoy today? If nothing else, hopefully it will get people to take that under consideration and think more carefully about what they support and who they support as far as being our leaders.
And history is very educational, isn't it? History is a good place to look to see how populations or citizens in a country react when certain things are given to them, or more importantly, how they react when certain things are taken away, especially their freedoms.
And are they willing to take the chance and stand up against, regardless of what the consequences might be? Or do they just want to sit back and say, okay, well, just do what you're going to do?
Doesn't matter what you think, doesn't matter what you feel, doesn't matter how it affects your family. This is how it is. I'm not trying to get on a soapbox for either side. I want this podcast to be down the middle, but it's important for us to think about what we fought for in this country, why we originally fought to become our own country.
Right. Again, yes, that's exactly why I want people to understand why this form of government was chosen, why not some of these others. What do we look at them? Look at the characteristics of them. Think about, do we want to keep what we have, or do we want to let us slowly slip into one of these other forms of government?
Let's talk about how some of these different things mix. You've got down here the different types mix, or economics, religion.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
In this last election, I saw a lot on both sides saying they're fascists, or they're communists, or they're Nazis, and something you have to realize, and again, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds with this, but sometimes characteristics of these forms of government mix with economics. Sometimes they mix with religions. Mm-hmm. The Taliban, for example, we hear about them a lot in the news. They're a religious-based militant group, and they're considered a militant/political movement. The leaders are Sunni Islamists. Islam has 2 sects or divisions, kind of like Christianity has Baptist and Methodist and all that. So Taliban is the militant political movement. They governed Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001. And again, since 2021, the Taliban now rules Afghanistan after the U.S. withdrew from trying to help them.
And when I hear Taliban, I think of a group who wants to tell women what they can do, how they have to dress when they go out
Right.
in public. Or we giggled a little earlier because your microphone stand right now is 5 books and a Kleenex box. But 4 of those books could be books that the Taliban doesn't think that you should be able to see. So we
Right.
would only have 1 book in a Kleenex box
Right.
there. So there are some serious ramifications for how these different things function.
And when people throw out terms like communism and fascism and all that, I mean, you hear all these, like I said, batted around, especially at election time or when there are topics under consideration in the government. There's just a lot of confusion. Communism and socialism, those are more economic terms than government terms or forms of government. Stalin, who I mentioned earlier, they also created a communist form of government, which, if you want to get really complicated, was based on Marxism, who was an economic, he wrote about economics of a certain group of people and a certain way to do things. Fascism, for example, Nazi is a far-right political form of authoritarian government. You have to be careful when you're tossing around these
Labels.
terms
Yes.
and labels, yes, that you're using them and you really understand what they are. We have a capitalist form, economic form of government in our democratic republic. Some countries, especially some of the European countries, have a socialist form of economic system in their government that probably they're some type of democracy or constitutional form of government, but they're running more of a socialist type of economic system.
Words have meaning, and so when we water them down and use them in arguments where they really don't apply, we really should only use words that we're confident in knowing, because if you call somebody a communist or a Marxist, you should really know the meaning of that.
Exactly. And that's one of the points of this episode today. The other is people will go back and think about these 5 main forms of government and some of these economic and other terms that we brought up and consider your life and what type of government system you really want to live under.
I like to also say not only what kind of government system you want to live under, but what do you want for your kid?
Exactly.
Or your grandchildren 50 years from now? Is this what you want for them? Because we want the best for our families. I think it's important. That's why we're in this space talking about this right now. So we talked about 5 different groups that are very different groups from the top to the bottom. But the 5 again, just to recap.
Okay, we have democracy and the different various types of that. Monarchy, which is a king or a queen. An oligarchy, which is a rule by a few. Authoritarianism, and I'm going to throw authoritarianism and totalitarianism in there kind of together because it's basically you're being ruled by one person that has all of the power. I would say totalitarianism is harsher
Sounds awful.
than authoritarianism, but they're both certainly not something I would want to live under.
I think about just growing up and disagreeing with my parents, and I'm trying to figure out what one of those categories mom or dad would fall under. But I'm just saying I wanted my voice. We don't realize how important our voice and our opinion is until somebody says,
Nah, you can't say
we
it.
don't want to hear what you think anymore. We don't care what you think. This is how it's going to be. So thank you for breaking those down for us.
And our democratic experiment is going on 250 years. Still think back to Ben Franklin.
Yes.
It's a republic, dear, if you can keep it.
Can keep it. And that's our task, is to keep it.
We're the longest surviving democracy.
And
to
why do you
ever
think that
exist.
is?
I think it's because the framers, they really thought this through. And
They were so smart.
They made the Constitution. It's called a living document for a reason. It has an amendment process.
We have constitutional
and
amendments.
they realized that over time, things would change.
Yeah. It's funny when you think back, you think there was a time when a lot of people in the country thought, you know what, I think we shouldn't be allowed to drink alcohol. So, you know what, when we send the men and women to the Capitol, let's outlaw alcohol. And then it turned into this whole thing, and then this secret alcohol business.
And it didn't work.
No.
So they had to
what they
retract
do, they had to be like, oh, oops. my bad on that one. And now we have the 21st Amendment.
Right.
That alcohol is legal again. So it's nice to know that people don't just say this is the way it's going to be for the next 1,000 years.
Right.
So that we're able in our government to go back and look at things and change things to work for this moment. So yeah, I love it when you say that the Constitution is a living, breathing thing. All right, so that was a lot. That was a lot, but we made it through, and we're not giving you slack yet, because now it's time for the pop quiz. So, pop quiz time.
Bueller.
Last episode, our question from the citizenship test was, name one of the 5 rights or freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment.
So you've got the First Amendment, which covers a lot of things, but speech.
Yes.
But it covers more than that.
It does. It's not just freedom of speech. We're going to talk about freedom of speech at some point.
It's a whole episode.
People misunderstand it.
Yes.
So speech is one of the 5. Religion, freedom of religion. Assembly, which
Getting
means,
together.
Yes, you can, if you want to protest, you can join together. If you want to have a meeting and talk about stuff, you can do that without government interference. Freedom of the press.
Close to the heart.
Yes.
As a reporter and news
We
anchor.
need the press,
We
but
do.
we need reliable press.
Yeah.
And then the last one, which most people don't understand, is petition the government.
What's that mean?
Sometimes it's called redress, like redress, but redress. That means that if you want to protest Congress, just like we've seen a lot of these going on in the last week at state capitals and out in D.C., as long as it's peaceful, you can hold your sign up.
Yeah,
And it's
I like
like I
that.
used to tell kids, if you want to say, hold a sign up and say, I don't like President Bush or I don't like President Biden,
Right.
that's perfectly fine.
You're not going to get in trouble.
That is petition, or I don't like such and such a law, or I want it to be this way, or whatever. You're not going to get in trouble.
Yeah, I'm for book bans. I'm against book bans. I'm for a woman choosing her autonomy over her body, or I'm against that,
Right.
or there's no repercussion.
And the thing I used to tell my students, you're okay doing that, like I don't like President Bush. I can hold that sign up and say that. Where you step over the line with any of this is, I don't like President Bush and I'm going to kill him.
You can't say that.
You cannot say
when
that.
you say that, the hair stands up on my body, and I feel like I have to say that wasn't a threat, because that is serious. That's like yelling fire in a movie theater.
Yes, and all of this, the petitioning the government and the right to assembly, is all based on that idea that it's done peacefully. So you can't do threats. You can't say, I want to kill the president. You can't say, I want to kill Congress, or I'm going to burn the Capitol down because I don't like these lawmakers.
You have to take those seriously. And when somebody says, I'm going to fill in the blank, and harm is the ultimate goal, that's where you have to draw the line.
Peaceful.
Peaceful,
You have to be peaceful.
assembly, peaceful protest. All right, so that should explain what the acceptable answers were for that question from last episode. So that leads us into, Bobbi, what is the question for next episode?
What did the Declaration of Independence do? In other words, what was its purpose? So why did they write the Declaration of Independence? And then our next episode is going to be about the difference between the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution.
People confuse those,
They
right?
do. They do. That's why I want to talk about one is a set of laws and the other one is not.
Okay, so that we're going to spend a whole episode on that. We hope you'll join us. In the meantime, we hope you'll go to our social media page on Facebook, like us, Plain Civics, the podcast, and tell us what you think. Rate us, give us some feedback, ask us a question. This is We the People. That's what the whole point of this is, and to educate folks. So we would love to hear from you, whether it's constructive criticism and something you don't like, or something you do like, or something you want to hear more from us.
I would add, if you have a topic you would like for us to discuss.
We will do it. You have some sort of magical portal somewhere as a teacher that you get this information and all I do is show up and sit here and smile for the camera and ask questions, and I love it. I thank you for the hard work that you do to get these episodes put together and in an outline form so we can do this. Thank you to the Logansport Cass County Public Library. I feel like I'm back home. It makes my soul happy to be here to record these episodes, and we will see you soon, and we will talk more about how we the people can make a difference in America.
This is Plain Civics. Join us for the journey as we break down the basics of how government works so you can make the government work for you.